From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Thursday, February 27. Back-to-back interest rate cuts look a bit less likely. New numbers from the Australian Bureau of Statistics show the Reserve Bank's preferred underlying inflation gauge climbed 2.8% over the 12 months to January, slightly up from the previous month. The United States is doubling down on tariffs and denting Australian hopes of an exemption from Donald Trump's 25% hit on steel and aluminium. Treasury Secretary Scott Bashan said tariffs are a crucial tool to reindustrialise America and generate government revenue. Those stories are live now at theaustralian.com.au. Artist Khaled Sabsabi signed a petition demanding Israel be excluded from the 2024 Venice Biennale. That's the revelation today in The Australian's Margin Call column, the same column that kicked off a stink that's seen Sabsabi dumped as Australia's representative for the next Biennale in 2026. Creative Australia, the former Arts Council, has admitted it had no idea about Sabsabi's works depicting Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and the 9/11 terror attacks before choosing him for the gig. Today, the agency's bosses get dragged over hot coals at Senate estimates.
I want a retraction from you. I have not broken the law.
I'd listen to a very offensive tirade in silence. I'd ask for the same respect.
If you're a politician interested in a spot of grandstanding, there's no better place than a Senate Estimates Committee.
If you didn't offer your resignation, just say it.
Minister, will you now apologise, not just to me, but to my staff and my family?
Instead of being so silly about this,
to go down
just
and you know
settle
it.
down and answer the questions. That's what you
At parliamentary committees, the pollies grill anxious public servants and sometimes public figures.
You're either going to have to believe me or call me a liar.
That's the late Nine Network owner Kerry Packer at a 1991 committee appearance, where he did a little grandstanding of his own.
Now, of course I am minimising my tax, and if anybody in this country doesn't minimise their tax, they want their heads ripped. Because as a government, I can tell you're not spending it that well that we should be donating extra.
Parliamentary privilege applies, which means you can't be sued for anything defamatory you might like to say. And there are extra points for sounding as outraged as possible.
Of a Murdoch newspaper hack job and a Conservative MP asking some questions in Senate question time. I tell you what.
Here's Greens Senator Sarah Hanson-Young with her dander up at a Senate estimates hearing on Tuesday night.
I tell you what, I think you have fundamentally undermined artistic policy in this country for a very long time, and people are very upset about it. Very upset.
The senator was busy ripping into Adrian Collette, the chief executive of an outfit called Creative Australia, previously known as the Australia Council, and his board chair, Robert Morgan.
You went into panic mode and you pushed the button. It's not good enough. It's not good enough.
That Murdoch newspaper hack job she was talking about, by the way, was an item in our business column Margin Call that set off a massive kerfuffle in the arts world. Everyone seems to be upset. Here's a quick recap. Earlier in February, Creative Australia announced Australia's team at the Venice Biennale 2026 would be artist Khaled Sabsabi and curator Michael D'Agostino. Business columnist Yoni Bashan wrote an item about it in Margin Call on February 11, headlined,
Arts Council takes creative approach to racism.
Yoni's item described Sabsabi's history of creating works featuring
questionable and ambiguous usage of Hassan Nasrallah, the dead Hezbollah leader. We don't know exactly what Sabsabi feels about Nasrallah or his death, or what he meant by taking a bunch of beams and shining them out of Nasrallah's face, or painting him in watercolour, as he did for a separate exhibition. But we do know how Sabsabi feels about Israel. He was one of several artists who boycotted the 2022 Sydney Festival after its organisers committed the grievous sin of accepting $20,000 in funding from the Israeli embassy to pay for a production put on by an invited Israeli choreographer.
Then a Liberal Senator, Claire Chandler, asked questions about it in Parliament.
Mr Sabsabi has previously produced artwork promoting Osama bin Laden and a series of 9/11 images of the aircraft hitting the Twin Towers titled "Thank You Very Much." Will the Albanese government immediately reverse the decision for Mr Sabsabi to represent Australia at the Venice Biennale?
And then Creative Australia announced it would be dropping Sabsabi and D'Agostino. The pair released this statement.
We are extremely hurt and disappointed. We intended to present a transformational work in Venice, an experience that would unite all audiences in an open and safe shared space.
At Senate estimates on Tuesday night, Adrian Khaled said it wasn't the piece in The Australian, but in fact Senator Chandler's questions that made him call an urgent board meeting and propose dumping Sabsabi and D'Agostino.
We strive to uphold the power of art to unite and build understanding, but we cannot be blind to the very real risk that the choices we make can also have the potential to trigger divisive narratives.
Khaled seemed to be saying it wasn't that he had a view about Sabsabi's art, but that he believed the controversy could blow up the whole organisation.
As public debate intensified and scrutiny was applied to some of the artist's prior works, it became very quickly evident to the board that the organisation was confronting significant risks to its future mission.
There were two intriguing revelations in Khaled's evidence under questioning from Hanson Young and Chandler. First, Khaled said he didn't know about the Hassan Nasrallah work You until after he decided to appoint Sabsabi as Australia's representative for Venice.
I was made aware of You, the artwork about the Hezbollah leader, about a day or two before the launch.
So that's after the decision was made to appoint Sabsabi, but before it had been publicly announced in early February. Second, Khaled didn't know about the other work, with planes flying into buildings on September 11, 2001, and George W. Bush saying thank you very much, until Claire Chandler raised it in the Senate. Khaled said he immediately rang board chair Robert Morgan, then called Minister Tony Burke.
Well, I described the image. I said, I think we have an issue here that the board needs to discuss. And so we got busy bringing the board together.
He wanted to add it wasn't unusual to have no idea about an artist's prior works before a commission like this.
Characteristically, we do not do searches of artists' back catalogue. We don't do that. We judge the work in front of us and its potential to fulfil the brief that we are looking for. So I'm very confident saying there wasn't a thorough search of 30 years of artistic enterprise, thousands of images, before we made the decision to appoint Khaled and Michael.
Here's Yoni Bashan.
Look, I think generally Adrian Khaled presents as a person of very serious character. It's very clear that he takes his job extremely seriously and that he cares about the future of Australian art very much. I felt overall that he was doing his very best to try and defend what has been a indefensible series of steps that were taken by Creative Australia. I think what we didn't hear from Adrian Khaled was a simple admission that this entire process could have been avoided by not selecting Khaled Sabsabi and Michael D'Agostino in the first place. But I think that's what they were thinking.
On Google, I went back in time a little to see what the results would have been if I'd searched Khaled Sabsabi's name before February 2025, when this drama all started. The first result is a page from the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney, which includes a biography of Sabsabi. Click on that and you find this. We've used a voice actor to read it aloud.
This is the case in his video work You, 2007, for example, which formally plays with a recording of a speech by Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah following the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon after the 2006 Lebanon war.
The second result I would have got on that Google search is Khaled Sabsabi's own website. Click on Works and I find a page full of his artworks, including that 2007 Hassan Nasrallah piece, You. And Thank You Very Much from 2006. That's the one with planes flying into the Twin Towers and George W. Bush.
Thank you very much.
Not hidden, not hard to find. If you were thinking about giving Khaled Sabsabi a commission to, say, represent Australia at the Venice Biennale, these works were there to be found.
Adrian Collette has learned the hard way that not Googling someone can come back to bite you pretty hard, and that was the reason why he was grilled so hard at Senate estimates on Tuesday night, and it's the reason why he's had to retract Khaled Sabsabi and Michael D'Agostino as the artist representatives to Venice. And at this stage, we don't have replacements for those people, and it's really unclear what the Australian pavilion at the Venice Biennale is even going to look like.
Coming up, Jewish and Israeli artists have found themselves being cancelled ever since the Middle East conflict flared up in October 2023. So, what's different about this? Khaled Sabsabi certainly hasn't been hiding his artworks. There's been no attempt to kind of scrub his website of things that might cause controversy. And he hasn't been shy about his opinions on other platforms either, has he?
No, he hasn't. I mean, this is a guy who has joined petitions to, for example, boycott the Sydney Festival in 2022. And the reason why he and other artists wanted to boycott that festival was because the organisers dared to accept $20,000 in funding from the Israeli embassy. And the reason why they accepted that funding was because they wanted to host a production by the Israeli choreographer Ohad Narin, a renowned choreographer who was due to come to Sydney and give that performance, and so that was why they accepted the funding. But it wasn't good enough for a very large number of artists across Australia who decided that, well, they were going to boycott the Sydney Festival on that basis. But now we also learn, again, through a very simple Google search, that Khaled Sabsabi's name is also on another petition, which he signed last year, and that was to see Israel banned entirely from hosting a pavilion at the Venice Biennale. So this is someone who's unafraid about putting his name to petitions calling for the cancellation or deplatforming or boycotting of other artists, and yet here now he finds himself in a slightly similar position.
Yeah, the outrage on behalf of Khaled Sabsabi has been an expression in part of empathy for the humiliation that he's been through, and no doubt this has been a horrible experience. But there's an idea out there that he is being cancelled when nobody else has been cancelled. What do you think about that?
Well, it seems to me that in the art world, and I'm definitely not part of this world myself, but it would seem to me that in the art world, cancellation and deplatforming and silencing is something that occurs with regularity. We've heard from commentators in our own newspaper and elsewhere, guys like Josh Dabblestein, who've written about how if you don't subscribe to certain views, you might find yourself not being invited to certain parties or not being included in certain galleries. And there are consequences basically for not towing the line. And in my own reporting on Creative Australia, I've attempted to tease out the kind of ideological alignments that you see at a place like Creative Australia. And I'm talking about artists who Creative Australia recruits to sit on panels that adjudicate on taxpayer funding that may or may not go to other artists who are applying. And what we're seeing is that a high number of these panelists share the same ideological view, and that can be sliced and diced into anti-colonial viewpoints, anti-Australian viewpoints. They might also be anti-Zionist or anti-Israel. I think all of which means that if you're coming to the art world with a conservative approach and you don't hold the viewpoints of your peers, especially some of those in positions of power, you might find yourself missing out on certain benefits and privileges.
Or if you just happen to be Jewish, you know, there's a WhatsApp group of Jewish creatives who found themselves doxxed. There's artists such as Deborah Conway who say they have been deplatformed and denied opportunities. Just this week we've seen in The Australian the revelation that the chair of the Sydney Writers' Festival has quit in frustration because she didn't feel that Jewish or Israeli voices were getting a fair perspective at her own festival. So why is it different for someone like Khaled Sabsabi when he feels that he's been cancelled?
I think probably because it doesn't happen to him very often. And I think for Jewish artists of the kind that you mentioned, this is part and parcel. This is the infected ideology that pervades artistic circles at play. It's the reason why artists like Deborah Conway will have either her shows cancelled or people turning up to protests or people not turning up at all. This is how people express themselves in the artistic world. Cancellation is a byproduct. Discrimination. These are all byproducts of not towing the line and maintaining a viewpoint that's fashionable or popular amongst people who are influential in that sphere.
Yoni Bashan is the editor of the Australian's column Margin Call. To read all Yoni scoops, make sure you go to theaustralian.com.au/business.